Good day, my friends. One of the questions I have, maybe you can answer for me, is please explain to me why we have such an incredible amount of attention being paid to people protesting on college campuses, people manhandled, people hurt, people really, really damaged and bothered and harmed and beaten and arrested and deprived of liberty. Please tell me why we are paying attention to that, because it deserves to be paid attention to. But explain to me how we have, for whatever reason, decided not to be in any way involved in a concomitant or similar interest into how people in and during January 6th, how they were treated. Does that make any sense to you? Tell me why we are so interested in behaviors that seem to be untoward, unfair, and incivil, if there is such a word, incivility. But when it came to January 6th, American protesters who dared to speak regarding their belief that the 2020 election was stolen or improper or whatever, they don't even have to explain. They don't even have to explain the basis and bases of such. Please explain to me how they, through some kind of, I guess, way of thinking, are not entitled to speak. But we have this inordinate amount of attention. And I'm not suggesting it's not warranted. I mean, I've seen the way some of these protesters have been treated by the police. It's brutal. It's barbaric. But what happened to the January 6ers? Ashli, Babbitt. Why do the people who are, whoever represent those, and please, this is not a referendum per se on who's right or wrong regarding Israel, whatever. I'm not even going there with it. My question is, I love how things are paid attention to. How does that work? Explain that one to me. Explain that to me. I'm fascinated by it. Fascinated by how we seem to have this focused, selective, kind of irregular amount of interest paid to certain things. Now, let me explain something to you. And I'm not going to ask anybody's permission, but let me explain this and say this again for the umpteenth time. And this is critical, okay? The people who themselves were involved in these behaviors on January 6th in no way committed seditious conspiracy, in no way threatened anyone. In terms of our country falling to them, falling to their particular modalities of protest. Joe Biden said a while back, do not think that your Second Amendment is going to do anything to protect you from some rogue government, because you're going to need F-16s and tanks and nuclear weapons to try to overthrow this country. You're not going to be able to do it with your stupid and silly forms of weapons and AR-15s and the like, because you could not possibly overthrow the government. Do you hear what I'm saying? You could not do that on your best day. Yet, and I find this to be fascinating, Yet, you're supposed to, or the country's supposed to believe, that on January the 6th, these ragtag, pot-bellied insurrectionists in any way, at any time, posed a legitimate and actual threat to this country? Do you believe that for a moment? Do you think it even remotely possible that the guy with the eye patch and the pot-bellied and the panis tenter-bellied, rotund, obese, in some cases extremely out of shape and woefully wizened, do you believe these people actually at any point posed a threat? And by the way, what about the people who were taken away to some DC gulag in some basement? Did we ever hear anything about them? Did anybody ever come to their aid? Anybody ever come or mention them and their wherewithal? Does anybody care about them? Did anybody at any point, and this is critical, Did anybody at any point ever think to ask the question, wait a minute, what about them? What about them? I'm not going to mention Ashli Babbitt because we just don't give a damn about her. No, I mean, nobody cares anything about her at all. Who shot her? Why? Whether it was excessive, doesn't even matter. Why a trained member of the Capitol Police would shoot somebody who poses what? What kind of a threat? To use deadly force? Did he receive no training? Did he use the appropriate amount of force to counteract this horrible, this harridan, this vile and dangerous version of whatever it is? I mean, do you really think for a moment that any of those people deserve the treatment? Whatever happened to them? Where did they go? They were beat up and they were arrested, and some of them never. We don't even know if some ever were released. They could be languishing in some Devil's Island version of this as we speak. Nobody cares about. How is it that people show this selective interest? And again, I'm going to say this for the umpteenth millionth time. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we should completely refuse to acknowledge the care or lack thereof or mistreatment of protesters involved in various campus events and the like. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, why did the January 6th protesters not garner any kind of interest? Because they were Trump supporters. Because Trump supporters are deemed provocative. They don't have the right to complain. If your position is in support of Palestinians or Gazans, if that is the way it is, then God bless you. You are fine. You are to be immediately heralded. You are to be lauded. You are to be given this absolute this position as a protester. You're unfairly treated. But January 6th. Different story. Why? You were Trumpers. And as a Trumper or a Trumpy, you don't deserve the same type of care as some Emory University philosophy professor who happens to be there. There were people in Washington who'd had nothing to do with any kind of march. They were just standing there, and they were corralled and thrown into, again, these underground gulags. Nobody cares about them. Please tell me, please explain to me, please, how our society differentiates between victimization. How is it that if you were doing exactly the same thing as these protesters, exactly, in fact, the protesters, put it this way, and I'm sure it happened, but a lot of these folks didn't look like they were just happened across the quadrangle and, hey, I'm going to my class. Oh, what's this? Wait a minute, I'm being arrested? No, they were there deliberately to participate, to observe, which is their right. And I am not saying they don't have the right to do this. What I'm saying is, had this been a Trump rally, had they been arrested by the police because they were wearing a MAGA hat versus a keffiyeh or whatever, any type of ceremonial garb, and please don't hold me to it. I'm not at all verse or conversant with Palestinian apparel, but that's one thing. These obnoxious, did you see these obnoxious protesters at UCLA? There was a Breitbart reporter who said, I want to just be here. You can't. You've got to get press credentials. Excuse me? Press credentials? Yeah. Who the hell are you? We're in charge. And wear a mask. Wear a mask? The mask group. The COVID army. They're still around us. They were throwing like towels and blankets on this reporter. That's battery. Listen, I'm sorry. I know they don't care about it because he's a Breitbart person. You see how this is? Because he's a right-winger. Conservatives and right-wingers do not deserve the same amount of attention and are not as protected, and their message not as warranted, not as important, not as critical as these people. That's the part that drives me crazy. It is this abject and total and complete hypocrisy that drives me nuts. So while I understand and while I herald and while I support the First Amendment, while I warn everybody, please remember it's right here, my friends. This is not just an expression. This is the Constitution of the United States. While these protesters and students and individuals and citizens have the right to make their statements known, to peacefully assemble, to make noise, to be inconvenient, there's no protection against protest and free speech not being inconvenient. I'm sure on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, traffic backed up. I'm sure on the day of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I'm sure somebody probably threw down some trash, and I'm sure the parking was a real bitch that day. But you know what? Protest is a bitch. Free speech is a bitch. The First Amendment's a bitch. I understand that. But I say again to you, and I want to make sure you understand this crystal clear. Nobody gave a damn about the January 6th protesters. Nobody cared. We don't even know if there are any of them still there. And those protesters, these babies, do not have their subject matter emblazoned on billboards on Route 3 in Jersey saying, do you know any of those individuals who dared protest at Columbia or Harvard or Emory or UCLA like they did in this APB Bolo? Be on the lookout for those Americans who dared to utter an opinion as to January 6th. So don't give me this crap. Yes, it's right. You are right. It's not fair for them to have police records and to be manhandled and slammed. You're right. But what about January 6th? Why don't they get the same amount of attention? Why isn't their right to speak and their right to protest? Why aren't their God-given constitutional liberties? Why aren't they provided the same amount of attention and the same amount of care and the same amount of constitutional vigilance that some of these pain-in-the-ass brats get? I'm sorry, you know it and I do it. Let me explain something to you. The Palestinian cause is one thing, but some of these people show up because they have no life. They figure, I'm 20 years old, I'm in college, I'm going to have fun, I'm going to protest like mom and dad did. This is an Instagram moment. We're going to eat sushi and pound on a drum and be a complete and total horse's ass because I'm a 20-year-old with a mind of a 5th grader and I live in this self-entitled la-la land of Ivy League, halcyon blah. Do I make sense to you? I hope so. I really hope so. Now comment as you see fit.